Okay, Mr. Chair, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Welcome, board members, foundation staff, and guests to the National Science Board 494th meeting. My name is Victor McCrary. I'm the acting chair of the National Science Board. This meeting is convened at 3:02 Eastern Daylight Time on May 7th, 2025. Following this update, we'll hear about the development of Science and Engineering Indicators 2026 and discuss a new multi-sectorial initiative related to the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, or finally called GRFP. Thereafter, there will be a break until the top of the hour, so we will break at approximately 3:30 and resume again at 4 o'clock. At that time, we'll have a presentation and conversation at 4 o'clock with Jimmy Goodrich of RAND on an extremely timely topic: U.S. competition with China in science and engineering and NSF's essential role in winning this race. I'd like to begin by update and by acknowledging recent leadership transitions at the foundation. First, I'd like to recognize and thank former Science Board Chair Dario Gil. Dario stepped down from the NSB last month following his committee confirmation hearing towards becoming Undersecretary for Science and Innovation at the Department of Energy. Dario's contributions to NSB were both visionary and actionable. And during his 5 years on the board, and especially in the past year as chair, Dario challenged NSF, NSB, and the broader S&E community to respond positively and creatively to the changed S&E landscape. He urged us to forge a future in which we will build and educate together across sectors, reinvest in domestic STEM talent, and reimagine our S&E institutions to stack dollars and better position us to beat China. In keeping with this vision, Dario helped, and he did. He helped NSF to successfully launch the TIP Directorate and deepen its ties to other sectors and help NSB to undertake projects to pilot new ways of building and educating together. We deeply appreciate Dario's dedication to NSF and wished him the best at the Department of Energy. Let's give him a round of applause, please. I'd like to recognize and thank NSF's 15th director, Setharaman Panchanathan, or Panch as we finally call him. Panch brought his infectious energy and passion first to NSB. Let me just say as an aside, every time I was in a room with him, I didn't need a cup of coffee. He just radiated so much energy all the time and passion, and you see him on stage, my God. And he served from 2014 to 2020, and I had the pleasure of serving with him as a fellow board member, and obviously when he transitioned in June 2020 onward to the role of agency director. NSB is grateful to Panch for his transformational leadership that took NSF in new directions. Among Panch's signature achievements were the advent of the TIP Directorate. I mean, and I think that was transformative. The first directorate in over 30 years. Industry looked up and said, my God, NSF is really reaching out. We like this. This is great. And it was really a point of pride for him. And the new, like I said, not only new in 30 years, but its signature Regional Innovation Engines program, the deepening of the agency's efforts to forge public-private partnerships, particularly in the fields of artificial intelligence, and efforts to empower a broad array of institutions through the Granite program, particularly our MSIs and our HBCUs. Panch, thank you. Let's give him a round of applause. We want to thank him for what he has done. As we anticipate the selection of the next NSF director, NSB is working with the management team toward creating a leaner, more efficient next generation NSF. Next generation NSF must fulfill our founding mission, respond to the imperatives of the Connected Horizons era, and support science and engineering of the highest merit that delivers economic, workforce, and national security benefits to the American public per the executive branch who we report to. So on that, let me also talk about some staff transitions. On behalf of the board, I'd like to acknowledge the NSF staff who have recently opted to leave the foundation, often after decades of service. Thank you for all you've done for the National Science Foundation and the nation. I would particularly like to express thanks to two staff members essential to the success of our recent board meetings. First, I'd like to thank Andrea Rainbow, NSB's former executive secretary. That's right, give her a round of applause, and policy director. Andrea was a trusted counselor of multiple board chairs, and a skilled meeting planner who ushered NSB successfully into the era of hybrid meetings. Andrea also definitely led the board's policy team, bringing out the best in all who worked with her. And I said, she want to say it, she did it with a sense of humility and working in the backgrounds that made all of us look good. So let's give her a round of applause, as you have already. I would also like to thank Nimi Kanakakudi, who is retiring from the National Science Foundation. Nimi has been a close and valued partner of the board for over a decade, first as an executive secretary to the forerunner of the Science and Engineering Policy Committee, and for the past several years as the Director's Office liaison to the board. Thank you, Andrea and Nimi. We wish you the best. Also, at this moment, just take about 15 minutes of applause. Let's again recognize all the NSF staff who are retiring or are leaving, who have served the agency over the many years, and let's acknowledge them through our applause, okay? Because those people have done a whole lot. So, you may not realize it or not, but it is the 75th anniversary of the National Science Foundation and the National Science Board. This Saturday, May 10th, marks the 75th birthday. The world we live in is not the one that gave birth to the foundation, in part because science and engineering, often supported by the foundation, has transformed the world so very much. So if you want to know about NSF and why some of us like it, because it's a Taurus, okay, born on the 10th, all right, stubborn, perseverant. As we celebrate and reflect on how much has been accomplished, I hope we will also recognize the success in the next 75 years will look very different. It's a legacy that Dario left with us when talking about the connected horizons and going forward. The landscape of science and engineering has changed, and NSF also needs to continue to grow and evolve. I hope that we will embrace this as a moment of an opportunity and continue to deliver on a mission that is more important than ever. As I would always say, you don't learn how to sail on calm seas. And this is a time for all of us collectively as a team to work together to expand beyond our own domain expertise, to come up and think about that reimagined foundation, to promote the progress of science, advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and most critically, secure the national defense. Let me talk about MRX. The board, within the constraints set by Congress and the president, sets policy for the foundation. It does. One of the most important of these is the board's merit review policy, how NSF identifies research worthy of funding to support its mission. 2 years ago, the board established a commission to assess the efficacy of our current merit review policy, in part responding to our charge in Vision 2030 to evaluate how NSF's broader impacts merit review criterion could better meet societal needs. And I also just want to remind you, as we've talked about, we get caught up in a lot of acronyms with VAS and NDA and SOA, that still Vision 2030 is still operative. It is our North Star that is taking us where we want to go, and it's flexible enough in terms of the next generation NSF we see. The commission found that rigorous merit review remains the best method for identifying research that both advances scientific knowledge and benefits society, and that NSF's implementation is the gold standard, and it is. I'm working with Wanda, Julia, and NSF leadership to finalize the commission's report and recommendations. And I will say that I believe the report's focus on delivering benefits to society and strategically assessing NSF's portfolio of awards are very timely and important. Please, let's give a hand to both Wanda and Julia for their efforts, because right now we are going to support the best science, and we're going to support science that makes a difference for our society. And we're going to get out there and tell those stories that are important of how we've changed women's and men's lives across this country, in every rural hamlet, in every urban city, in every barrio, in every reservation. We are going to do that, and we're going to do that better. NSB Executive Committee election results. Earlier this afternoon, NSB elected Dorada Greshner Brzezinski and Julia
Thank you.
Phillips to the two at-large seats on the board's executive committee. Their terms will run from May 2025, that's this month for you all, to May 2027. Let's please give them a round of congratulations. And I look forward to working with you both. You both bring a lot of thought leadership, and you're both outspoken, and you understand that I also believe if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So we're going to make sure we're sitting at the table going forward if I have anything to do with it. Engagement activities. Since our February meeting, the board has continued to engage with multiple sectors, including industry, national security, state, and other leaders on our shared goal of strengthening the U.S. science and engineering enterprise through creative and new multi-sectorial approaches and partnerships. And I'm going to mention a few, and I'm not leaving any out, but I just want for the sake of time. So former Chair Dario Gill gave a keynote address at the Baker Institute in Texas about exploring new models and partnerships for a national S&T strategy. He also met with the President and Vice President of the Japan Science and Technology Agency. I met with members of the National Academies Government University Industry Philanthropy Research Roundtable, used to be known as GWIR, now known as GWIPR, which is made up of S&T leaders across sectors, and the board is actively continuing those conversations. And I gave that talk basically about these cross-sectoral partnerships and challenged them to think outside of that, because they're kind of at the same place where we are now, as where does GWIPR and the academies really make a difference? Daryl Pines, who is the president of the University of Maryland College Park, heads that group. And one of the comments he made in one of our phone conversations is, Vic, we've got to think differently, because if we think about graduate education, it hasn't changed in 100 years. It's obviously that model's outdated. And so we've got to have these conversations. And again, tomorrow we've invited some members to join that. I also gave a talk at the University of North Carolina Greensboro campus to talk about cross-sectoral partnerships and where we would go. The UNC system is a very productive, research active enterprise. They're very, very interested at these crossroads to say, how can we think differently in our state? They're building an Apple plant there. They have tons of students coming in. They have a very, very broad population that they're trying to affect economically. And so they're saying to themselves, how do we think very differently as UNC going forward? Board members have also met with dozens of congressional offices and House and Senate committee staff. A lot of us, between the last meeting that we had in February, we met with all of the freshman congressional staffers. We met with Cruz's staff. We had some very good conversations. We met with the Democratic members of the HSST. We met with the Republican members of HSST. And so meeting on both sides of the aisle, we really have had some really robust and rich conversations talking about what does the science and engineering enterprise look forward. And I think in all of them, they do see and believe in NSF as leading that effort. A few of us also have had the opportunity to talk with the new OSTP director. Heather has met with Michael Kratsios. I knew him from Trump 1, and we have a meeting coming up. And about the urgency to win the technology race with China. And then finally, I mentioned it many times before, but we met with the UC Vice Chancellors for Research yesterday, John, Elise, and myself, and talked about the changed landscape and where we could go from there. So, indicators 2026. I'll turn this over to you, Julia. Julia, are you on mute? Can't hear you. All right, try that again.
Might need to switch microphones,
Yeah,
Julia.
you might want to switch microphones. We're not picking you up.
I think your headset might be the problem.
Your headset might be delivering that. You might have to speak directly into the computer. Tell you what, Julia, while you're figuring that, let me just switch. We'll go to Dorota, and then we'll come back to you.
All right, well, thank you, Vic. It is really my pleasure to give you a little bit of a story of the new initiative that came to life very recently in the last few weeks. And I want to offer a big kudos to Heather Wilson for bringing this idea forward. It's really very relevant to the discussions we have had today, and it has to do with how can we expand the base to support graduate fellowships across the country. As we all know, NSF, even in fiscal year 25, wasn't able to give even the previous number of fellows. I think it was about 2,000, and now in fiscal 25, it's only 1,000. So we are in the situation that thousands of very deserving, bright students who are American citizens or residents really are left without support, and oftentimes we potentially are losing them. So here is the overview of what we propose to do and started discussing, and some of you on the call already are aware, but I think many of you may not know the details. So this is really an idea to put together a extended partnership. And again, before we even can make it happen, we are right now, many of us are in discussions to essentially gauge the potential and understand the interest of business, state, philanthropic organizations, potentially other sectors, to offer those fellowships. And the NSF graduate fellowships, as I mentioned already, as just as a reminder, directly really supports the U.S. talent to pursue STEM degree. And this is really one of the core discussions we've been having, how we can strengthen our STEM education and bring more American students to graduate with advanced degrees. So for decades, these fellowships have been at the forefront of advancing scientific and technological research in very many critical and emerging fields, building innovation and securing the national defense, and also ultimately driving the US economic growth. So as I said, NSF unfortunately is only able to support 1,000, as I said, in 25, which effectively left 3,000 very deserving students with so-called honorable mention. And of course, the idea behind the activity I'm outlining is how can we potentially find other sources for fellowships for those 3,000 students, not only now on an emergency basis, but also think of potential future partnership among those sectors. And again, notice the common thread of everything we discussed today, right? Partnerships, association with other sectors, and working together in addressing a number of national problems, including K-12 and including STEM talent in academia. So, and as a little bit of what we think of how this partnership could look like. So NSF fellowship partners would be able to select students from the NSF list of honorable mentions. These lists are available. I, for example, already requested one for University of Wisconsin at Madison, and I'm working already on the list of 68 students who are on the list from Wisconsin. So these are generally young scientists who NSF identify as really high potential, and partners could find students who could study in the area of interest to the partner. They could look into the geography of the students, where they are from, maybe even specific schools. All this information can be made available. Potential partners could name the fellowship after the partner organization, and all while sustaining the original spirit of how those fellows are selected and how we allocate funding. So one of the expected commitment, if one wants to make a commitment, is really to commit to 3 years, as NSF does. So we want to make sure that this doesn't change. And also, as we continue to engage with those partners, we'll get a clear picture of how much interest is there. I think some of us on the call may respond to a few questions because some of us have started those conversations. But at the moment, this is a pilot project, and we'll see how much traction we get. And again, this is now the race against the time, because we really want those fellows receive, or those students receive fellowships before the start of the next academic year. Also, one other common thread is we all know that we are in technological race with China. So building a much more robust STEM capable workforce is the key part of winning this race. So this is crucially important that we all extend an effort to really expand the base for funding those fantastic students that, like I said, 3,000 of them right now. Only those who apply to NSF fellowship, right? But of course, there is many, many more. So I just also want to mention that decades ago, when US was in the technological competition with the former Soviet Union, the 1958 National Defense Education Act was a critical source of funding to really build this STEM education. And many of us have been in discussions over the last year or more, really toying with, I wouldn't say toying, bringing forward the idea of National Defense Education Act 2.0, which could ramp up our national ability to, again, compete with China, bring up the STEM educated workers at all levels and to many fields. So if we can bring this multi-sectoral partnership across the country to support NSF fellows, it would definitely expand the number of students, our own students, who could actually obtain STEM degrees and be supported during their studies. This, of course, is a key element of NDEA 2.0 that NSB has been discussing. And with that, I would like to turn over to Joan to really discuss a little bit more the NDEA 2.0 idea and how it really blends with the NSF Fellow initiative.
So thank you, Dorota. And as all of you know, the vision for a modernized NDEA 2.0 is very much focused on coordinating engagement across multiple sectors and working to educate together as a nation. And the NSB has been discussing this idea now for several years, and it's about addressing a growing domestic STEM talent crisis, as well as building talent in critical and emerging technology areas. And that effort continues to evolve. So I'm very excited about this reimagined, rebranded NSF Fellows Program that's just been described, because it's a concrete step toward NDEA 2.0. It's foundational, it can yield rapid and tangible impacts, and it addresses the urgent need for such workforce components as engineers in semiconductor fabs and many other areas. This program at NSF, the GRFP program, has supported over 75,000 fellows since 1952, the best and the brightest of domestic STEM students. It's the largest graduate fellowship program in the nation, and it supports all STEM fields. And so it's important to think about how that program evolves. And if we think about this as a multi-sector effort, ensuring the future of the STEM capacity and the workforce isn't just the job of the federal government, but as Dorota has described, here are ways now that industry, philanthropy, state government, and other sectors who benefit from these investments and these outstanding doctoral students, they can have a stake too, very directly in US research and development. So we're trying to build these cross-sector commitments. Many board members here on this call have been part of engaging with potential partners across various sectors. And many of you have expressed interest in learning more about this particular kind of partnership, this Graduate Fellows Partnership. So there's a call to action here for you all, which is to ask you to spread the word about this new Graduate NSF Fellows Program variation through your networks. NSB staff can provide you with terrific materials that will give you what you need to share this idea with potential partners and to gauge interest. As Dorota said, that's really important to start to lay the groundwork here. If you'd like to participate, please reach out to Andrew Zadinsky, and he'll send you what you need. I can say that the materials are in good shape, and you can take them to a governor or a corporate leader or any number of other folks in your state to start to pitch this idea. We'll just continue to gauge the interest of potential partners and determine next steps. Come back to you again later this year with an update. With that, I'll turn the floor back to our acting chair, although we also have a bit of time, I think, for questions, Vic.
Okay. With that, I just want to say I endorse this, and you all have received stuff from Andrew. I am a product of NDA 1.0, and I think I turned out okay. So I think going with NDA 2.0, we could obviously do a lot better and going forward. Julia, are you online now?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Julia,
Yeah,
why don't you
I
close
think,
why don't you go
yeah,
ahead and
I think
close it
I
out
was
with indicators?
yes, I think I was muted at your end, but I
Okay.
reconnected, so
Okay.
we're good. Okay, so thank you, Vic. First, I'd like to acknowledge the vice chair of this committee, Matt Malkin. This has been, indicators is one of the statutory deliverables for the Science Board, and it is aimed at the science and engineering community writ large. I'm going to spend a few minutes now just updating you all on our recent progress on the Indicators 2026 suite of products deliverable in March of 2026. Those are statistical reports on the United States science and engineering enterprise in a global context. In your board book, you have a midpoint update. We're about halfway through the Indicators 2026 cycle, and that document goes into greater detail on what we've accomplished and what's coming up. Materials are shaping up very nicely. Of course, indicators provide an analysis of long-term trends, and that will, we've seen it change so dramatically over the last several cycles, and we expect another very dramatic change in 2026. And in the context of changes taking place in our country, it's really important for us to understand all of that. The 2026 suite will have a wide range of years for most recent data, but some inclusion of 2025 data points should be possible for the rollout in March of 26. Few specifics. First, there is progress on a new product associated with the Indicator suite. As we've gone from 9 thematic reports to 3, we are now going to introduce Data Explorer online. And we've seen some early versions of that tool, and everybody who's seen it so far is very excited about it. And so we look forward to being able to actually play with some data in it this fall. We've also made very nice progress on developing an experimental indicators index led by Andrew Zadinsky, and that will help us quantitatively look across indicators to assess how the U.S. is doing relative to international competitors and how different U.S. states stack up. So these are areas of extreme interest, as our conversations have revealed. We have a promising prototype in hand, and we'll be able to share more detail with the SEP committee next month. Finally, we're looking forward to the approval and release of the first report of the 2026 suite. This is the one on discovery. That report assesses inputs and outputs for the generation of new knowledge, leveraging R&D statistics and publication outputs to paint a picture across sectors and in critical technology areas. All of that being said, I mean, a tremendous amount happening. We are absolutely partnered at the hip with the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, which lives within NSF. These are very challenging times, of course, for everyone in NSF, and NCSES is no exception to that, and the board office is no exception to that. As a result of all of that, the board, of course, must be prepared to scale its ambition in keeping with the resources available and the bandwidth of the personnel that can work on this. All of this is going to be in flux for a while, and so we need to be very innovative and imaginative in how we identify quality data sources. Some of them are going away. There are some alternates that we may be able to use, at least in some cases, and so forth. So more to come on that. It's just very much in a state of flux right now. Keeping indicators innovative and efficient in its approach is not new. Just as one example, NCSES has been pursuing new approaches to understanding the U.S. standing in emerging technologies and the role of the skilled technical workforce in national security, both areas that have been themes in our recent conversations. And you will start to see some of that as these pieces of indicators start rolling out. Of course, indicators is statistical and policy neutral. And so we invite you, members of the board, to consider key policy messages that might accompany them. So as the data start to become available, please be reading those very carefully. And Matt and I both invite you to reach out to us at any time to discuss point some directions that the policy companion that typically accompanies indicators might take. With that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my report.
All right, and with that, we will go to our break, and we will return at 4 o'clock. All right, let's go to our break. Thank you, Julia. Welcome back to the open session of the 494th meeting of the National Science Board. In this session that we have here, I think this will keep you definitely interested and glued to your laptops and your sets, your phones, because we have a topic which is how do we position, given what we just recently heard today and just recently earlier, as a secret weapon in winning the tech competition with China. It is my pleasure to welcome Jimmy Goodrich. He is a fellow of the Global Conflict and Cooperation and Senior Advisor for Technology Analysis at RAND, leading expert on technology, geopolitics, and national security. His focus is actually on China and East Asia. He is formerly Vice President for Global Policy at the Semiconductor Industry Association. Used to work with you when I was at Bell Labs, so we did a lot of stuff together. There he led the industry's China efforts, including on Chinese industrial policy and chip industry economics. And he's formerly director for China policy at the Information Technology Industry Council. And he spent years in the tech sector in China. You know, NSF believes that winning the technology competition with China is imperative for U.S. national security. I think all of us on here recognize that it's not just an economic challenge, but that is intertwined with the national security. And we're not alone in this view. We've all seen the op-ed from Senator Todd Young in the Washington Post. The Center for Strategic and International Studies recently published commentary that NSF is a key national security pillar. This is through NSF's basic and applied research and in the process training of the future STEM workforce. And let me just capitalize the domestic STEM workforce, because that's extremely important. That is a secret weapon we have. NSF is the agency whose mission is to promote the progress of science, advance national health, prosperity, and welfare, and secure the national defense. So, Jimmy, I'm going to pass the baton to you because I want you wholeheartedly and bluntly to our audience here, talk us about the state of affairs of the U.S.-China competition.
Well, Victor, thank you very much, and really happy to be here. It's a pleasure and an honor to brief the National Science Board about this new dawn of big science in China and what that means for the overall U.S.-China technology competition and for reordering of our science priorities here back home. I'll talk a little bit, about 20, 25 minutes around some of the research that I've been doing looking at China's overall new science and technology posture, some of the aspects of that build out, and then at the end, how it's impacting US-China tech competition. So with that, I'll just kick it off and begin. So I call this the dawn of big science in China because if we recall, there was a dawn of big science for the United States. Think about Vanderbilt Bush and Endless Frontiers, the US building up its national lab infrastructure at the end of World War II, carrying that on through the Cold War. And that national lab infrastructure, our investments into basic research, catapulted US economic and technological leadership, cemented modern technology such as the integrated circuit, GPS, the World Wide Web, and is still critical to maintaining our edge. China has marveled at that success that the United States has had for the last several decades and is really moving in a breakneck pace to try and replicate that success within China domestically. A lot of that has to do with increase in funding into science and technology, a prioritization from the party that science and technology is now one of the top development priorities under Xi Jinping, the rapid construction of dozens of new labs and facilities across China, and then also embracing AI as a way to accelerate scientific discovery inside the PRC. I think all of this has huge strategic implications for the United States because we know this formula works, it's worked for us, and there's no reason to believe it will not work for China as well. So I'll call it the dawn because this era is just beginning for China. And this actually is an image of sunrise at one of China's new fusion experimental reactor sites that's being built in eastern China, Hefei province. So I think many people have seen the dramatic rise already of China's science technology capabilities. The Economist did a very good piece last year where it showed how China's overall patent output is rising, its published paper content is rising, and also its number of high-impact papers by location. China, you can see in the middle graph, is accelerating in things like materials science, chemistry, engineering, where China is now the worldwide leader in those high-quality research areas. And of course, China's also been investing for 2 decades in its basic education system and its higher education system to prioritize science, engineering, and other disciplines that will help propel China forward. However, up until very recently, science within China has been a civilian discipline. The party has not, in the last 2 decades, intervened heavily in the science technology ecosystem within China. But that has changed over the last 4 years. In 2020, at the 20th Party Congress that was led by President Xi Jinping, he established a new National Central Science and Technology Commission that overrides and now sits above all of the nation's universities, labs, state-owned enterprises, government organizations, and coordinates national science and technology policy for unified party control to help eliminate barriers to innovation, bureaucratic stovepipes, and accelerate prioritization of funding. What it also means is that China has become more secretive. A lot of the activities and the decisions and the plans they don't publish. And they've also been moving to instill more party indoctrination amongst Chinese scientists and innovators. In fact, Xi Jinping believes that a more patriotic scientist with inside China will help contribute to China's national mission of national rejuvenation. And we can see that prioritization across the political leadership of China. Generally, the Politburo, which is the top political echelon within China, meets once a month, and they go out and fan out across China and visit different provinces and cities. And now it's a custom stop amongst every visit for whether it's Xi Jinping or his premier Li Qiang or others across the Politburo to incorporate visits to science labs, research universities, cutting-edge companies engaged in semiconductor, agricultural, life sciences, and robotics firms. This just indicates that science technology and science technology self-sufficiency, including the research infrastructure and ecosystem within China to be self-sufficient to produce those outputs, is a top political priority for China's leadership. This is partly in response to worsening relations between the US and China over the last decade, but it's also just a natural evolution of Xi Jinping's own strategy for national rejuvenation. And part of that, they see a critical pillar is being a worldwide leader in science and technology. The funding levels as well are increasing. On the left is a chart from the Special Competitive Studies Project that looked at how China's overall R&D intensity and basic research has been increasing. On the right is a chart that shows the breakdown that Chinese private companies are also spending a very large chunk of that R&D spend within China, but government funding is also increasing. And those are numbers that are a little bit outdated because of the way the metrics works at about 2 years behind. If we look at the most recent data, we can see a significant increase in funding for things like facilities, new labs, accelerators, light sources, and I'll talk a little bit about that. That's not captured in a lot of these overall macro statistics that China does publish. That focus really has been on building the infrastructure, the ecosystem, the labs. And what I argue is that China is trying to replicate this successful system. In fact, Xi Jinping himself has said that China needs to imitate the success that, say, Argonne, Los Alamos, and Lawrence Berkeley have been for the United States. And Xi Jinping has said he wants national labs and universities that revolve around national missions, meaning they can support the goals of the nation. And he's articulated those missions are serving the party, serving the country, serving frontier science, and serving the livelihood of people. And that's where life sciences and agricultural science also comes into play. But it's quite notable that Xi Jinping himself has said and studied this successful model of national labs and research universities that the US has really led, and he wants to imitate that success. And China is already making large strides, building and operating very sophisticated state-of-the-art scientific infrastructure. For example, China has already built and operating the world's largest dark matter lab in Sichuan province. And Guangdong, China is building the world's largest neutrino lab to look for cosmic mysteries, or is already operating the world's largest radio telescope. And for many of the researchers that I've spoken to that have been to some of these facilities, they're world-class. It's not a vanity project. The infrastructure that's going in, the people that are working on them are top tier. And China's really expanding upon that. In fact, in the 14 five-year plan, China has 20 new big science facilities planned across the country, everything from solar energy to human organ simulation to light sources, experimental nuclear reactors, fusion reactor technology. China is actually doubling the number of science facilities they're building every 5 years. In fact, in the 13 five-year period, they built 10. In the 12th, they built 5. And on this trajectory, they very well could double again as the next 5-year cycle will begin in 2026. China's also set up a very streamlined process for science project funding and approval. In fact, there's a special office inside the National Development and Reform Commission, which sits in their civilian government, that receives ideas from scientists around the country and then gives them the green light to go ahead and provide central government funding. Remember, inside the Chinese system, while you have a National People's Congress, it's very much a rubber stamp organization. And so this is a one-stop shop approval process for new research labs and universities within China. And we're seeing those approvals move very quickly. Some of the new type of facilities that are under construction are as I mentioned, the new burning plasma fusion reactor, a very large heavy ion accelerator facility. China's building a new national lab just to experiment with stellarator-based tokamak fusion reactors. This is just an example of the amount of construction that goes in the scale of these facilities. This is China's new heavy ion accelerator facility in southern China. They cleared a mountaintop to build this. And behind it are actually 4 new nuclear power stations that are being built at once to power this area of Guangdong province. So the scale, the speed, and the resources that China is able to mobilize for this effort, which really is a crash effort to build out national lab infrastructure, is really impressive. I think there's also some other motivations, which is they've seen access in the United States and also in some areas of Europe become more restrictive to Chinese researchers. And so there's demand now as China wants to propel forward to be able to rebuild that infrastructure within China so they can access it unfettered. China's building, for example, Reuters reported in January of this year, a national ignition facility-like facility that could be 2 or 3 times the yield or output that the NIF can produce based upon the size and the specifications of the facility. And this could put China at the forefront of not only fusion ignition research, but also weapons effects testing, given that NIF's primary purpose is actually weapons effects testing. China is also moving ahead in building a number of lasers, synchrotrons, and light sources. Many of them are either matching or going to exceed the capabilities in our own national labs with state-of-the-art technology, and also attracting international researchers to participate in these as open user facilities, much like the facilities that we've built that have really cemented our leadership. These will be newer, more modern, in many cases larger, with more sophisticated instrumentation than some of those here in the United States. And this just an example is the new Shenzhen superconducting soft X-ray free electron laser that China's building. It actually straddles across multiple mountaintops. It's a really impressive facility, and it's under construction right now. Even though this is a visualization, the construction has already kicked off, and they've cleared this out, and they're working on building it. China is also building, some other very novel facilities, such as a advanced attosecond laser, a new underground hard free electron laser, other multiple facilities, and also China is working on a plan to build a CERN-like facility that would at least be 50% larger than what is in Europe. China has also built what is the largest hypergravity research center. This is in Hangzhou in China. China is also building several different national quantum and precision measurement laboratories. So, for example, China has been a leader in quantum communications, but is working very intensely to build up their capabilities in quantum computing and quantum sensing as well. Many of these facilities are starting to attract cutting-edge talent. And for example, on the left is a chart showing that since 2018, we've already seen an uptick in overseas Chinese talent immigrate back to China, given that many of these facilities investments are an attraction point for a postdoc or even tenured professors worldwide, because the amount of funding available to them, the newness of their research infrastructure, the availability of research talent to be able to work on that project is quite ubiquitous within China. And already in 2024, there's been a number of high-profile movements of not just heritage Chinese or ethnic Chinese, but researchers worldwide that want to be part of this new dawn of big science within China. So one big question is, can AI and computing also boost China's scientific research? Obviously, China, one of the big things that will be an output of these research facilities and infrastructure is going to be data. And China is very keen on leveraging that data in a new AI for science paradigm by taking their very impressive list of top 500 high-performance computing centers, national supercomputers, and working to develop large language models based upon a lot of the scientific data that will be generated out of those facilities. China already has a very large national data center infrastructure program known as the Eastern Data Western Compute Program. China actually thinks of that as a form of scientific infrastructure. Computing, from their perspective, is a form of scientific infrastructure, given that most modern science is going to be simulated or increasingly using AI to help improve the process of that scientific innovation. And it's already taking off in China. For example, multiple government institutes, labs are working on developing domain-specific large language models for earthquake prediction, biological science, climate science, many exceeding hundreds of billions of parameters. Think of it as ChatGPT 4 or 5 for scientific applications developed by the scientific community inside the PRC. An example is Pengcheng Labs, which is a lab in Shenzhen with 3,200 researchers, a large annual budget, brand new lab, and it's almost focused exclusively in partnering with the Chinese private sector, in this case Huawei, to develop a foundational model that's being used for astrophysics research and other areas as they're integrating that data set that's generated from those new facilities, for example, one of China's space telescopes, into this new AI system. Another example is Zhejiang Lab outside of Hangzhou. They have their own large facility that was just built, and they're in fact putting large language model payloads in space working to help optimize the energy efficiency of satellite payloads and other type of activity, which is showing how China is also using AI and scientific discovery in an applied manner, not just for basic science, but also for applied science and engineering. Just to close out my formal remarks here, and then open it up for questions and discussions. I think there are macro challenges on the horizon. What I've sort of painted this very big picture of China moving forward at rapid speed under a crash program to build and replicate both in quantity and quality the U.S. research ecosystem. However, there are some characteristics about this that will create challenges for China, from my perspective. One of them is party and political ideology. Now, every scientist, and particularly those in government labs and universities, does have to spend an increasing amount of time on party doctrine and discipline. This, for example, includes spending days out of the year learning about Xi Jinping thought on science. How scientists should reorient their missions around party objectives and national objectives. For example, on the right is an image of China fusion scientists that are going to a party indoctrination camp in another city without China. On the left is an image of the Shanghai S&T community getting a lecture on Xi Jinping thought about building China as a strong national science and technology superpower. The other challenge, of course, is funding. As China sees a slowing economy, so far it has not deprioritized science and technology funding. In fact, it remains at the top. And that's because the party believes this is going to be one of the key pillars that will propel China forward into the next several decades as a global leader. And they've been unwilling to sacrifice new particle accelerators, light sources, universities, even under a slowing economic arrangement. That may not last forever, but for now, even with the tensions over the trade war and the pressure that's put on Chinese exports, the Chinese government has still remained steadfast in its priority. But that could change if economic growth does further slow. So overall, I think what the United States needs to prepare for is a China that is highly ambitious, highly motivated, highly organized, and mobilized to push its nation towards the frontier of scientific discovery. And it's doing so in a way that we know best, which is replicating the era of U.S. big science and developing national labs and science technology infrastructure. And in many, many areas, China is already and will be increasingly so, not imitating, not a fast follower, but will be a pioneer developing new scientific discoveries. It's very likely that the totality of all these new investments that China is making, for example, will likely produce a Nobel Prize organically within China over the next decade. Some of the conversations I've had with scientists have told me they believe, for example, in some of the light sources or other areas, they're so innovative, so pioneering that they could produce significant scientific results for China. So with that, I'll stop and open it up for questions and discussion. And again, really thanks for the opportunity to share my thoughts around this really important topic and engage in a discussion.
Hey, Jimmy, thank you so much. This was really, 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 really enlightening. What I'd like to do, because she has prepared some questions already, is turn this over to Sarah O'Donnell to ask some questions and moderate. But I have just one remark and a question for you. I'm a product of NDA 1.0. We grew up saying we're going to beat the Soviets to space and do these things. And so there was a patriotism. You made a remark, patriotic scientists. How do we recreate that in the United States, or can we?
Well, I mean, obviously the Cold War era is very different than that of today. The world's a lot more globally interconnected, and we're interconnected still with China in many different ways. And there's going to be a lot of areas of science that I think we still want to benefit from collaboration. For example, in life sciences and some other areas that benefit humanity more generally. And maintaining some openness does allow us to have some visibility into what China's doing. If we don't have any interaction, we won't know, for example, the type of discoveries they may be on the cusp of. That being said, I think understanding that, or sort of reminding our scientific community that much of the work they're doing may be in a basic science discipline that may be 2 layers disconnected from a national security or national security benefit. But I think talking about that around the the nature of fundamental and basic research seeds lots of capabilities downstream, whether it's in applied science, applied engineering, and it benefits us economically. If we want to be the global economic leader, for example, in semiconductor technology, most of the basic research that helped create, for example, extreme ultraviolet lithography that ASML today is the dominant leader in was generated out of the US national labs. The first devices were done at the Berkeley Light Source. So all of this really fits together in a big puzzle piece.
Okay. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy, for an amazing briefing. I'm Sarah O'Donnell. I've been leading the board's focus on national security, and I just want to thank you for such a comprehensive, informative briefing on the state of technology in China. Your insights are really prescient, and I think critically inform the scientific community regarding the global competition for scientific security. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to start off by asking a question about our primacy. So the US has led the world in scientific discovery and serves as the center of gravity in warfare for innovation, which has served as deterrence against war. With China playing this long game to overtake us in scientific leadership, there are concerns that we may lose the ability to retain that primacy over technological surprise. Do you see this as China's Sputnik moment against the United States? And if so, what can the National Science Foundation do to counter the strategic pivot by China?
Yeah, I think this is, several dozen Sputnik moments at once really happening. And it may be there's so much happening that we're sort of missing it. And also, I think the general US view towards China has been a nation of imitation, process innovation, not one of scientific discovery and fundamental research. That has been rapidly changing over the last decade and is only going to accelerate as all these new investments will pay dividends for China. So I think it's resetting our understanding of where China is in terms of its scientific prowess, and it's going to increase. Also, much of this is organic. There's little that we can do to restrain Chinese researchers from building their own facilities and conducting their own science. And so we just have to expect it's going to continue to accelerate. I think what's really important is the National Science Foundation, National Science Board can play a really pivotal role in helping to educate the nation around the challenge that China will pose for our global science and technology leadership, assessing on a sort of net assessment basis where China's making these investments, where the gaps will be once they come online, where they might be ahead and where we might be behind so we can better orient our national science and technology strategy.
Thank you so much. It's very insightful. I'm going to turn it over to Bev for the next question.
Yes, thank you. That was an amazing presentation. I had no idea all that was going on. And I guess what I heard was that the government really in China is spearheading this effort. And so we're looking at, and they're building what seem to be national level facilities similar to our national labs. We're not doing that right now. We're not making those kinds of investments, but we do have other venues such as universities, et cetera. So I'm curious, what do you think should happen for us to maintain our preeminence in this area, given the limitations that we currently have? And who's involved with the partners?
Yeah, great question. So one thing to point out is that within China, all the universities are state-owned as well and operated by the government. So their system is very different from ours in that the universities are very much an extension of the government. And when they set government policy, all the universities follow. And many of the universities are research universities. And so they're just like ours, competing for government contracts, government facilities, and science projects. But they're part of that sort of integrated system. So when we think about how do we maintain our competitiveness, we don't want to mirror the Chinese system and have a, command and control research infrastructure. We've been very successful in this decentralized model, but it's how do we work together, rowing towards a common goal and a common direction. I think also ensuring that our facilities are not out of date, that we're refreshing them. But also recognizing in some areas where we have to be more fruitful with how we spend money. and saying, well, just because China's building a brand new facility, we can look carefully at it and realize it's just going to be as good as what we have. So we don't have to worry about that. But there are other areas where we, need to conduct a very deeper evaluation. But I think it's part of a education and awareness that we've been at a very comfortable position as the global leader. That will not maintain itself for very, very much longer. And that we have to realize that, there was nobody in the rearview mirror for a very long time, but now they're very close.
I believe Ryan has the next question. Ryan?
Thank you. Jimmy, thank you so much. I feel like your 15-minute presentation should be played before the Super Bowl so every American can see it, right? So we are properly informed about what our competition's doing. It was clear from your presentation that the US playbook is being copied and implemented, but I can't help but ask, are they also adapting the playbook and creating new plays? What have you observed as working better from their approach? And what can the federal government, NSF, and other federal agencies do to stay ahead?
So they're doing a lot of adaptation, changing some of the way their systems work. For example, up until very recently, historically, with inside government-funded science programs in China, they tend to go to the university or the research center that's always gotten the funding, to the senior scientist who probably should have retired 10 years ago but is still working, and sort of hoards a lot of the funding. They've actually tried to break that, and, for example, have a new rule that says for all national mega projects or national key R&D projects, the principal investigator has to be under 40. And so they're, for example, working very hard to try and reduce the age of the workforce, because they believe that more creative ideas, more creative approaches are going to be thought from the more junior research talent. In fact, earlier this year, China, on its national television, had a 30-minute sort of, I'd say 60 minutes type documentary where they had a profile of a under 30 Tiger team that had full funding from the Chinese government to build their own hypersonic glide vehicle, and successfully engineered, simulated, tested, and then dropped it from a high altitude air balloon, and it had a successful launch. And that was, an indication of just how strong China's trying to push the reform of their system to remove vested interests, to instill more youth and vigor into their science and innovation ecosystem. But also, they're very much working in a coordinated manner. And this is what this new Science Technology Commission is focused on, is instead of each university and lab coming up with their own plan, they have a new national roadmap. So thinking about what the role that the National Science Board can do as well is not setting firm goals and plans, but help illustrating for the research community what that roadmap could look like, is also something that, possibly we could learn from.
I think the Tiger Team concept is very interesting. Are we tracking that closely within the intelligence community or within a broader scientific community with regards to China in this commission?
I mean, I think overall, U.S. Monitoring and research into China's basic science technology ecosystem is vastly underinvested in. There are probably single-digit number of people that have the official responsibility of writing and researching and conducting analysis on China's basic science and technology ecosystem policy advancements. There's almost that I'm not aware of a single funded research center in the United States that has the primary task of just conducting open source research on China's science technology advancements. Ironically, in Europe, there's two efforts, both of which are in Germany, where the German government is funding some efforts to look into this space. But I believe we're going to put ourselves at a critical national disadvantage if we don't increase our efforts to understand both the development trajectory and the capabilities that China's putting in place in science technology. So I think it's a national priority that's unfortunately not getting the attention it needs.
Jimmy,
Go ahead, Suresh.
I'm getting a feedback, so I don't know. Okay, let me quickly state the question and I'll.
Tell you what, Suresh, let's move over to Mel.
I was wondering, are non-Chinese who move to China to do research subject to the same uh, uh, philosophy lessons that the others are?
Yeah, that's a great question. So far, no. Really, it's only for party members, and to be a party member, you have to be a Chinese citizen in most cases. So what we're seeing is the significant increase in global South, European, and East Asian research talent that is spending more time at Chinese universities or research institutes as visiting fellows, non-resident fellows, or postdocs. Uh, we're also seeing some high-profile moves, but overall, it's a lot more short-term interaction. Whereas in the United States, in my conversations with the scientific community have shown that because of the tensions, it's been on both sides, research community, the engagement has really significantly decreased. And I think China recognizes that, and they're really making a pitch, for example, to expand its S&T cooperation with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Belgium, Netherlands, Singapore, Japan. So far, in my interaction with the research community in those areas, they still are very open to engagement with China. For example, China's working on developing in the semiconductor space a new light source based upon steady state microbunching. And that's a partnership with Fraunhofer, Germany, and Tsinghua University. That type of engagement would likely not happen between the US and China, but it is happening still between other parts of the world and China. So I think we have to be really cognizant that not every other part of the world is sort of bought into the competition paradigm, and we have to work to manage that expectation, but also work on our relationships with some of those partners and allies.
Thank you.
I believe Aaron has a follow-up. Aaron?
Yes. Thank you, Jimmy. I'm old enough that I'm a experimental energy physicist. That's my scientific background. I'm old enough that I was a young graduate student at the CERN laboratory in the early 1990s, shortly after the fall of the USSR, and had many colleagues from the from the very recently previous Soviet states. And they all had to go to Wednesday meetings with political minders in order to maintain their status there, which was a real privilege to be at CERN outside of the Soviet Union. But all of them thought it was just, they took it very seriously, because if they didn't do it or they mouthed off, they'd get sent back. And that was it. Their privileges were finished. But none of them really believed in it. So it was a real weakness. And the sort of the seeds of destruction for that whole setup were, sown in the very fabric of the communist ideology. And I'd like you to comment a little further on, the weaknesses that you pointed out at the tail end of your talk about these ideologies. And is there some way that we can exploit that at the National Science Foundation in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do believe that while Xi Jinping believes it's a strength, I think overall it's going to be a weakness, which is a more red and loyal, patriotic scientist is going to be a more innovative, more frontier science-oriented scientist. I think that will likely be a drag overall. But if you look at all the other ways that they're accelerating their car to drive 200 miles an hour, that may be a 15 mile per hour impediment, but they're still driving at 175 miles per hour, which is still a cause for concern. So I think it's going to create challenges and inefficiencies. For example, if a lead scientist has to spend, 3 days out of a month doing party work, that's 3 days they're not working in their lab, they're not working on research, they're not working on talent cultivation. So it's going to be an inefficiency. But China believes it's necessary to motivate these scientists. Will it motivate them? We'll see. I think in the short term, though, what is sort of overcoming that within China is just the ubiquitous funding, the large amounts of funding that scientists are being given. So if you're a loyal scientist and you're willing to work inside the system, you're showered with benefits and funding. So China essentially is saying, look, if you accept this, you're going to get everything you want for your next generation deep space telescope. We'll approve it, et cetera, et cetera. If you work on party discipline indoctrination. I think, though, there is an advantage for the United States to exploit, the working conditions in a lot of Chinese research universities and labs is under the 996 framework, which means you work 9 to 9 every day, 6 days a week. Oftentimes, these research labs are way outside of the main cities. You live and work at the lab. You don't really have much social life. There's a lot of inside politics and other things that people have to deal with. And there's been a lot of stories of even Chinese that have been, educated abroad. They come back, they work, and they just doesn't fit for them. That won't be everybody, but I do think, though, our system of more flexibility, more attention to the individual researcher, because in the Chinese system, it's not about the individual researcher, it's about the collective unity and what they can produce as a whole. But I think our focus on the individual and individual liberties is an advantage that we and our allies have that will continue to attract talent.
Thank you so much for that. I want to check in with Suresh and see if you would like to jump in.
Yeah, the quick question, Jimmy. Thank you very much. So one of the things I would like to ask you on from the concept to deployment, one example you gave on the hypersonic glide vehicle, how long they took, 3 months or 6 months or 2 years? That is the worry I have.
So they move very fast. I mean, China's speed overall in engineering and mega projects is very quick. The new National Ignition Facility that China is building is about a 2 to 3 year construction from likely start to finish, whereas it would probably take a decade for the United States to build something like that. China is building multiple new large hypersonic wind tunnels at very fast speed. And that's because China's been a nation of building things for the last 2 decades. They have economies of efficiency at scale where they can mobilize their construction industry to move quickly. For the hypersonic test vehicle, I believe was about a year-long project that they did, which is very quick, obviously, from ideas to actual simulation. But also they're encouraging competition. So, for example, in hypersonics, there's multiple government and military research labs that all compete against each other for different deployments in military systems. We've seen that in supercomputing, where even though China owns all of the organizations that develop their own chips and HPC systems, they intentionally have 3 of them to encourage managed competition, so that they don't get vendor lock-in or one idea, and they can generate. They like to foster some of that competition.
Thank you.
China might have efficiency of scale, but I still firmly believe that we have the most creative and innovative talent around in the world. I want to turn it over to Marvi for the next question. Marvi?
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Jimmy, for that incredible presentation. I'm Marvi Matos Rodriguez. I serve at the board, and I also work as director at Boeing. And I wanted to ask you something that is maybe a bit of a crystal ball type question, right? So put yourself in 10 years from now. What happens if we do nothing, right? Doing nothing, it's always an option. Or maybe even further, like we actually reduce the investments in R&D, and we don't necessarily understand, or we don't invest in talent and workforce today in a more accelerated pace. What happens with that relationship with China?
Well, I think it's very clear. If we do nothing and just ignore the fact that China is trying to replicate our success, or even worse, continue to decrease our investment into basic science and engineering, we'll wake up in a decade and China will be leading the next wave of innovation in commercial fusion, in quantum computing, in next generation commercial aerospace, in life sciences and discovery. And so they will have an economy that will be more efficient, more productive. They'll have a military that is more advanced, more lethal. They'll have an intelligence collection platform that is more larger scale. They'll have a cyber capability that is more advanced and more automated. And that'll be a world for the United States that I don't think we want. And so to maintain the U.S. national security and also our economic and security interests, we do have to double down on our science and technology investments. Otherwise, we'll just be overtaken and we won't even really understand what happened to us.
Thank you so much.
Doubling down on the investments is certainly something that we strongly feel is important, especially in the current challenging climate. I want to turn it over now to Jeff for the next question. Jeff?
Thanks, and thank you, Jimmy, for taking the time with us today. Looking at your charts, and especially the group of photos, it's really remarkable, the kind of mirroring of U.S. facilities in science and engineering. And of course, a hallmark of our approach, for time immemorial, has been openness. And when you were alluding to the role of the Chinese Communist Party in the S&T enterprise, I started wondering, how long will it be before some of the openness that we might see now as Chinese scientists in China as a world power, climbs the ranks in terms of scientific publications and peer-reviewed journals and other measures that bring prestige. What's your prognosis for openness in China, especially in some of the critical technology areas?
That's a great question. And I think there's a tension within China between security and openness. In fact, several years ago, during the height of the first technology and trade war, China's vice premier, who was responsible for science technology, gave a talk to the China Academy of Sciences and said, in this new era, Chinese scientists need to be low key to not attract attention. At the same time, they want China to be a recognized world leader. They want to win Nobel Prizes, and you can't do that by closing the drawbridges and redacting your publications. So I think it means that we'll be more selective in the type of science that we see more publicly them talk about and feature in the Global Times and the People's Daily. We're starting to see that, for example, for a lot of these facilities, China's very quick to talk about astrophysics, space telescopes, marine life sciences, but China said nothing, for example, about their next generation laser ignition facility, or nothing yet about their new quantum measurement facility. And so I think it's being selective. Those that have a very clear basic research, less direct connection to national security, China's very open and talking about them. Those that have a very strong dual use application, we're very open about those. I mean, the NIF is very public and Z Machine and others, whereas the equivalents in China are pretty much off the radar. And so I think we have to understand that they're going to be selective in what they want the world to learn about in terms of their scientific progress, but there may be a lot more that we don't see because they don't want us to see it.
Thank you.
Very interesting to look at the even China's reveal and conceal kind of approach to what they want to share and what they don't share, and what that tells us as their priorities. I'm going to turn it over now to Kevon for the next question.
Thanks very much, Jimmy. This has been really informative and eye-opening. I'm Kevon Stassen. I'm at Vanderbilt University, professor of astrophysics. One of the things that we've been looking at the National Science Board in particular is the presence that the National Science Foundation maintains on behalf of the nation in Antarctica. It's one of the biggest major research infrastructure operations that the National Science Foundation undertakes on behalf of the nation. Can you say a word if you have any perspectives or if Antarctica South Pole presence scientifically, geopolitically, otherwise is on your radar?
Yeah, I mean, China's prioritized polar research as a scientific domain, also deep science, deep earth, essentially every corner of the globe and space they're thinking about for scientific exploration. They see it for national prestige. Historically, the West, particularly during the Cold War, sort of was prestige to, or who could control more by having these scientific outposts in different parts of, say, the Antarctic or the South Pole. There's also minerals extraction they see as a possible advantage of the type of minerals they might be able to, or other resources, gain access to. And then, scientific research. China is putting a huge focus on atmospheric and environmental studies. They want to understand, for example, how fast the ice caps are receding, so they can understand opportunities for maritime shipping lanes and other things. It's not just science, but also economics, national security that play directly into polar research for China. We're seeing the same in maritime and deep sea research, where China is investing heavily in building deep ocean exploration capabilities, seafloor, seabed mapping. I was chatting with somebody recently who was saying China is basically building the equivalent of Woods Hole and Scripps, but 3 or 4 times over, with a much larger workforce to look at ocean and marine science. As they see it, if they want to be a maritime power, they have to understand maritime and ocean science. And if they want to expand their global fishing fleet, extract minerals from the seabed floor, they have to invest in the science and technology infrastructure to build the talent, the people, the understanding. So China sees this all interconnected to their national prestige, geopolitical order, security, economics, and technology.
It's very interesting to hear about the maritime dominance focus, because I think the oceans are huge opportunity for exploration we don't really understand, and basic science helps us to get there. I'm going to hand over to Julia for the next question, probably final question for the session. Julia?
Yeah. Okay. First, an observation, which you didn't say, but I'm pretty sure that it follows naturally from what you said, which is that as another country comes to dominance in science and particularly technology, they also get to call the shots on things like standards and things like that. We haven't even thought seriously about that because we've been dominant for so long. And so, that, and then you couple it with all the societal and cultural and geopolitical things that go with it. It's really very significant, I think. One thing you haven't talked about that I think it'd be interesting to see what we might observe and learn from is the education, to get the top scientists to be top scientists in the Chinese in the Chinese education system. And, thoughts about, first of all, how widely across China those opportunities are open to people. Second is there's just a huge number of them, of Chinese. Of course, they outnumber us by a huge factor. And the fact that of those that do go on to higher education, a huge number of them are engineers, and then a smaller number of scientists, way outstripping percentage-wise, even much less numbers, the number of students who go into those fields. Just what thoughts occur to you in that context?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're a technology leader, you can set the standard, you define the ecosystem, then everyone has to play in your sandbox. That's essentially where the US leads today in AI. We control the computing stack, we set the standards for it, all the research, all the supply chain. And so we're able to set the ground rules for how others engage in it. For example, if China is first to realize a viable pathway to fusion energy, then they can set the standards for how to export it, who can access it before we can. Likewise, in say a modern quantum computing system where it's deployable at scale based on a Chinese standard that may not be interoperable with ours, then that's an advantage for China. And same as if you look at all the investments that China is making, the biggest thing that will be the output of them is trained talent. And this is going to give a significant capability for China to be able to advance forward.
Excuse me, Willie May here. My camera doesn't work, so I can't raise my hand, but I'd just like to make a comment, if I might. In my prior life, I was director of NIST, and me, along with the director of the PTB in Germany, the NPL in the UK, and a number of other national standards laboratories, their directors were a part of the advisory board for the Chinese equivalent to NIST. Some of them still are, but several years ago, I stepped back from that because it was obvious to me that they were trying to glean us for as much information as they could so that they could take over the world leadership in measurement standards. It was very, very, very clear and transparent to me. I'm not really sure some of my colleagues saw that, but it was very, very clear. And I stepped back for that reason.
Hey, Jimmy, I want to throw one final question out here before we close out. And that is, as you know, for the past 20 years, the Chinese have really prospered from the Belt and Road Initiative, okay, across Africa and South America. But in many of those countries, they find out that that has been a Faustian bargain because they have not been training the local population. They've been just using them for unskilled labor. What if the United States were to propose a Congo and Salsa initiative? I've talked to the National Security Advisor 2 years ago. Because of our population, we have connections to both Africa and South America that the Chinese don't have through generations of people who have come to the United States. How can we exploit that to build those relationships, not only for resources, but also for talent and also to rebuild trust?
Yeah, I mean, China is, a formidable country. They're making all these investments, but our decades of relationships with the global South, with South America, Africa is an advantage. People still want to come to the United States and work here. And so as long as we work and think about a multiplier effect, that if, China on its own is, yes, over 1 billion people with world's second largest economy, but the United States together with many of our key partners, Europe, Japan, South Korea, others, we can achieve more than they can together.
I would also say that would be a good opportunity for universities like where Heather Wilson are, HSIs and HBCUs like Morgan, UDC, Howard, and others to get out there and they can build those relationships naturally with the global South, which can then if we live up to it, can not only get talent, but we can also have access and relationships. Jimmy, I'm going to thank you for your time. Everybody, please give him a round of applause. This was a great presentation, and I believe all of you have received it from Amanda. I emphasize that the board views science for security. It is a top priority. I mean, we think that is the gold nugget, and we'll establish a working group to promote and support this. And I want to again, Sarah, thank you for your leadership in this and for also the conversations that you're having. This is really fantastic. If there are no other business at this point, I would say to the board and to the audience, I thank you for attending this session as well as this meeting. Thank you, Julia. This has been phenomenal. At this point, this will end the 494th meeting of the National Science Board. The time is 4:58, and I hope you look forward to taking all the nuggets that you all have gotten today, and let's continue our conversation, and we got good work to do. So